gather together to migrate, but they don't travel alone because wolves are waiting for them. And where they live in northern Canada, the lives of wolves there are incredibly hard. Some packs only consist of 8 to 12 animals, and they quite often have to hunt alone. And when I said about their lives being very hard, that's mainly down to the fact that because there's so little food, many adults don't live beyond 7 years, and about 75% of pups die before they're a year old. So the caribou migration is a very important event for them, because at that time they're starving, and the caribou, as well as their newborn calves, are what the wolves are waiting for. And how they hunt is wolves will charge at a herd of caribou. They will cause panic in the herd so they can single out young, old, weak, injured or sick from the herd. I mean, if a calf is separated from its mother, it's an easy target. But wolves usually will always go for the weakest members of their prey's herd. And while it may be an unfair end to their prey, it ultimately assures that the rest of the herd remains strong. Probably the most dangerous prey that wolves in the Arctic hunt is this, musk oxen. Musk oxen are bovids or bovine animals, so they're in the cow family, and they are some of the most ancient creatures alive today. In fact, musk oxen were actually around during the Ice Ages, so they evolved around saber-toothed cats, mammoths, woolly rhinos, dire wolves, and many other predators and animals that are now extinct. And they are probably the most dangerous prey that Arctic wolves regularly take down, because they have very short tempers, they have a skull that's like a sledgehammer and a battering ram, and they can accelerate at 36 miles per hour. And using their enormous horns, they could quite easily snap a wolf's spine in a flat-out charge, or they could stand their ground and gouge and gore at their attackers with their horns. Of course, big, fully grown, healthy adults are rarely preyed upon by wolves. It's usually the calves or lone elderly bulls that are brought down by wolves. And Arctic wolves are also opportunistic. I mean, they don't hunt large animals like caribou and musk oxen unless they have pups to feed. And quite often they'll feed on lemmings that are small rodents, Arctic hares, or ground nesting birds. In fact, they'll take pretty much anything they can find. Here is their range. And of course, right here is Ellesmere Island, where the wolves there have no fear of man. Now, I'm going to show you the next animal, which is probably the most famous polar animal. It is the emperor penguin. Now, emperor penguins are the largest of the penguins. I mean, a fully grown adult would probably come about right up to my hip. And while they do look quite comical on land, when they're in the water, they turn into a torpedo. And while they can't fly, their wings have evolved into kind of like flippers that they use to propel themselves forward. And a lot of what they feed on is krill, which are a shrimp-like crustacean, as well as fish and squid. In fact, they can eat tons of that in a day. Of course, penguins will mate for life, and they will have one chick each year. And this is where the truly incredible side of the emperor penguin comes in, because once the female lays the egg, the male takes the egg and he rests it right on his feet and tucks it into a pouch underneath his belly. And as the females go out to sea to feed, the males who have eggs will stay on land to look after the eggs. And of course, in winter, when winter rolls round in Antarctica, the sun doesn't rise for 5 or 6 months. And so they're blasted by gale force winds, and the temperature can drop to well over -60 degrees. But the emperors are very well prepared for that, as well as their thick layer of fat, called blubber, under the surface of their skin. They will also huddle together, each taking it in turns to have their backs to the gales, and they will tuck their heads into the huddle to preserve heat. And they all take it in turns to have their backs to the gale, all while keeping the eggs safe and warm underneath their pouch. And when spring arrives in March, the sun finally rises, and the male, and I have a lot of respect for male emperor penguins because they will have survived the coldest and darkest winter on Earth and lost almost just over half their body weight and not eaten for months, all to protect their egg. And when the eggs hatch, the males will give them some form of milk that will sustain them until the females return, and with bellies full of fish, and they will then take over looking after the chicks, while the male can go off to sea and feed for himself. And another thing that I've always liked about penguins is that it's just how they tend to look after their chicks, because they tend to wander away, and what they do is that the males, both the male and the chick can recognise each other's call, and they can hone in on each other. The only natural predator of penguins in Antarctica is leopard seals, killer whales, and southern sea lions. And here is the range of the emperor penguins. Now, I'm going to show you the different kinds of penguins. That's the penguins of the world. There is the emperor penguin, Adelie penguin, the chin-strap penguin, which looks like it's got a helmet on, and the king penguin, which is a cousin of the emperor penguin, but just a little bit smaller. Genti penguins, which are the fastest penguins in the sea. The northern rockhopper penguin, and the macaroni penguin, which is not actually named after pasta like I thought when I was a kid. They're actually named after a colourful 18th century hat. Then there's the royal penguin and the southern rockhopper penguin. Then in South America you've got the Magellanic penguin, the Humboldt penguin, which is a very common species you see in zoos and safari parks. Then the Galapagos penguin. Then in Africa you've got African penguin. Then in Australia and New Zealand there's the little penguin, yellow-eyed penguin, the Fiordland penguin, the Snares penguin, and the erect-crested penguin. So there is a lot of penguins out there, not just in Antarctica, but also South America, Africa, and around Australia and New Zealand, which completely blows my mind. The next animal I'm going to show you all is probably the most well-defended herbivore of the Arctic Circle, but also an animal that I briefly touched on earlier. It is the musk oxen. Musk oxen, as I mentioned earlier, are bovids or bovine animals, which means they're in the cow family. And if your idea of a cow is a slow moving, dopey freeloader chewing the cud, you couldn't be more wrong, because this group contains animals like the water buffalo, the Cape buffalo, the bison, and of course the musk oxen themselves. They're all animals that are very big, very strong, and can be very, very grumpy and unpredictable. And that's especially with musk oxen, because in the summer months, when it's the breeding season, male musk oxen fight like battering rams over females. Well, basically by charging at each other and slamming their heads right into each other like that. And they have their thick skull is like a sledgehammer, and their spines are built to withstand a jolt. But in many battles, they can lead to one of the opponents being killed. Of course, musk oxen have notoriously bad tempers, are built like tanks, and they can accelerate from 0 to 36 in just under 2 seconds. So they can outpace a sports car. But also their fur is incredibly well insulated. In fact, the outer layer is very long and thick, but the underlayer is almost like cotton wool, and it insulates the musk oxen against the cold. And in fact, if I was to put on a musk oxen pelt, I would start to overheat in just a few minutes. It's that warm. I also mentioned earlier about musk oxen, because they were around during the ice ages, so they didn't just evolve around Arctic wolves. They also evolved around animals that are long extinct, like the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhino, as well as the saber-toothed cat and the dire wolf. All kinds of animals like that, so they are, of course, but these days their arch enemy is the wolf, to be precise, Arctic wolves, and I've actually seen a musk oxen skull like this, and of course in a flat out charge a musk oxen could snap a wolf's spine, or if a wolf got too close it could gouge and gore at the wolf with its horns. And of course, quite often when musk oxen are threatened by predators such as wolves or potentially bears, what they do is they gather up as a herd with the calves on the inside and present a wall of horns to any attacker, and quite often that can make a wolf keep its distance. Of course, musk oxen are not endangered or vulnerable at all. There are still hundreds of thousands of them in the Arctic Circle, but if you ever do want to go see them, it's always important to read their body language and keep your distance and don't make them feel threatened, and they won't charge. But, of course, in the Arctic, where they live, when it's the winter time, food can be a bit hard to come by, but believe it or not, musk oxen can survive on lichen that grows on rocks, and that can be enough for those big animals to feed on, so they can sustain themselves throughout the winter. And also, I've never been up close to a musk oxen before, and I don't think I would want to, because they are one of the most frightening animals in my opinion. Here is their range in the Arctic Circle. Now, the next creature